Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, May 5th, 2023. It's about 1:35 in the afternoon here on the East Coast of the United States. Here are your hot topics for today. And as usual, we picked the hottest for you from Enrique Tarrio, who's the leader of the Proud Boys, recently, yesterday, convicted of sedition, to Yevgeny Prigozhin, cursing out Vladimir Putin. Prigozhin is, of course, the head of the Wagner Group. To will President Trump testify or won't he in the civil rape trial? And how is the judge going to handle that? So yesterday, when I was discussing with all of you Mr. Tarrio's conviction, I misspoke. I said that none of the five defendants had been at the Capitol, and I was wrong. Enrique Tarrio, the head of the Proud Boys, the person who was accused of being the orchestrator of the conspiracy, was in Baltimore on January 6th. So he obviously wasn't at the Capitol building. The other four were. Of those four, three were convicted of sedition, one was not. So they all were convicted of lesser crimes. My complaint is convicting somebody of a conspiracy that never happened. You know, the famous Clarence Darrow phrase. Now, this was said 150 years ago when a dime was a lot of money. Here's his famous phrase to a jury: if a boy steals a dime, he's not going to go to the penitentiary. A small fine, more than a dime, will cover the prosecution. But if two boys conspire to steal a dime and then don't do it, they're going to go to the penitentiary. What kind of a country does this? Answer: ours. A very simple way for a jury to understand the power of a conspiracy charge and the evil of a conspiracy charge. The federal government, when it prosecutes someone, has to prove, in addition to the elements of the crime, that they actually did what the government says they did. It has to prove intent, that the person intended to do this, and it has to prove harm, except in a conspiracy case, because by definition, in a conspiracy case, there is no harm, since the defendants are being prosecuted for what they thought they were going to do, but they didn't actually do it. In this case, these folks were charged, Enrique Tarrio and his four colleagues, five defendants, four convicted of sedition. With sedition, sometimes called seditious conspiracy. That's redundant. Sedition is a conspiracy, an agreement to overthrow the government of the United States of America by force. Two problems here. One, it's just an agreement. By definition, it didn't happen. If it happened, the crime would be insurrection, not sedition. Two, it's a thought crime. Nobody was harmed by it. Nevertheless, the way Congress wrote the statute and the way the courts interpret the statute, the feds can get away with prosecuting somebody for conspiracy without showing any harm. The Clarence Darrow example is very simple and very basic. Obviously, the dime analogy wouldn't make sense today. You'd have to say a $50 bill or a $100 bill for it to make sense today. But you get the point. The government wants to prosecute thought, because when it can get away with prosecuting thought, it doesn't have to prove harm. What harm is there by a bunch of people thinking they can interfere with the passage of governmental power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden? If you use violence to interfere with the passage of that power, if you use the violence, of course you should be prosecuted. But if you think about using the violence, if you plan and plot to use the violence, but don't put the plan or the plot into action, there should be no prosecution at all. I've been criticized for this. I don't care. Here's another reason there should be no prosecution. If the plan was impossible to carry out, it shouldn't be the subject of a prosecution. How could five human beings overthrow the federal government of the United States of America by force? It's impossible. You might as well plan or plot to jump over the moon. So the government uses conspiracy because Congress wrote it in such a way, and because the courts have interpreted it in such a way, it's the most dangerous weapon they have because it effectively prosecutes thought. What is Mr. Tarrio and what are his colleagues facing because of their thoughts? 20 years in jail. 20. On top of the other things that they were convicted of. The others that were there that day were convicted of acts of violence and encouraging insurrection and say, yeah, go in and get them, and trespassing and things like that. I get that. I understand it. I understand, but I don't get and will never accept the prosecution for thought crime. You know what the Wagner Group is? That's the private army hired by President Putin to assist the real army, the real Russian army, in the special military operation, otherwise known as the war in Ukraine. And the head of that private army is an oligarch, a multi-billionaire by the name of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Very, very unhappy he is that he doesn't have the ammunition he needs. Now, he has his own sources for ammunition, but his principal source for ammunition and for weapons is the Russian military, the Russian Department of Defense, and they've been supplying him with ammunition. Lately, a lot of his Wagner troops are very rough, tough fighters. Some of them are convicts who were let out of jail, and if they survive the firefight that they're in against the Ukrainians, they don't go back to jail. They're free. But his guys are generally better fighters than the Russian army. They're not better trained. They're not better commanded, but they're better fighters. They're reckless. They're ruthless. They're careless. They don't care who they kill. So when they run out of ammunition, obviously it's catastrophic. Well, this fellow, Yevgeny Prigozhin, filmed himself personally attacking the defense minister of Russia for not giving them enough ammunition. And the film was taken in front of dead, killed Wagner soldiers. Now, the way the film is configured, I don't know how he did it, if it was on his iPhone or how he did it, but the way the film is configured, you can't see the dead bodies, but you'll see him point to them. So you're going to see him in a moment. We're going to run it twice. First, you'll hear him yelling and screaming, and you'll see the subtitles in English. He yells and screams in Russian. Then we're going to run it a second time silently for those of you that are listening to us on your mobile devices rather than watching us on an audio podcast. I will recount the subtitles. I'm obviously not going to use the foul language. He uses the F word many times, and I will simply say F word. I'm not going to say the word. So here's a very, very angry Yevgeny Prigozhin on film 24 hours ago, verbally attacking like you've never seen or heard the Russian defense minister.
У нас нехватка боеприпасов 70%. Шойгу, Герасимов, где боеприпасы? Посмотрите на них, Если вы даете норму боеприпасов, их в 5 раз меньше. Они пришли сюда добровольцами и умирают за то, чтобы вы жировали в своих кабинетах с красным деревом. Учтите это.
All right, we're going to play it again. You won't hear his voice, but you'll hear me reading the subtitles. We have a 70% shortage of ammunition. Shoigu, Gerasimov, where the F is the ammunition? Look at them, F. If you give the normal amount of ammunition, there will be 5 times fewer of them. They came here as volunteers. They are dying so that you can gamble in your redwood cabinets. Take note of that. Okay, Shoigu is the Russian defense minister, and Gerasimov is the chief military person, the equivalent of the American chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is a very bold thing for him to do, because the Wagner Group really has been substantially helpful to the Russian military. Very, very bold for him to attack his benefactors and his patrons like that. A lot of people think that Mr. Prigozhin hopes to succeed President Putin in the presidency of Russia. He's a billionaire many times over, and he's not afraid of getting dirty fingernails. He's out there with the Wagner Group. Well, shortly after he said that, the Russian military responded to him and basically said, you won't be surprised to hear this. If you don't want to fight for us, go. If you want to leave, go. We'll use the Chechens, because the Chechen military are the best non-Russian military fighters we have and that we can ask to help. So, Mr. Prigozhin, if you don't like the way we supply you with ammunition, you can go. We'll use the Chechens. This is an internal Russian battle still going on. We'll ask Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor about it next week. Meanwhile, we have learned that the Russians are jamming. The Russians have found a way to jam the computer systems, the American computer systems that operate the HIMARS. The HIMARS are a combination of missile and artillery. They're missile because they go a great distance and they do a lot of damage. They're artillery because they're on a truck and they're mobile. You can drive the truck to where you place from which you want to shoot it. This is the equipment that's operated on the truck by American troops out of uniform, operating American computers. I'm pretending I'm operating a computer with my fingers. Then the HIMARS are engaged by American troops in uniform in Poland. So when you heard me say, are American troops using American equipment to fire American ammunition at Russian boys, the answer is yes. But the Russians have found a way to jam the American computers in Ukraine on the trucks at the HIMARS. And when they do that, the HIMARS don't work. So this is obviously not very good news for the Ukrainians and not very good news for the Americans if they are there operating American equipment. It doesn't work because the Russians are jamming it. Joe Biden, Mr. President, would you please tell the American public that we have troops on the ground, whether they're in uniform or out. Stop playing games, whether they're supposedly guarding the American embassy or not. The documents that were released allegedly by that young fellow, Jack Teixeira, and by him alone, allegedly, show at least 100 special forces in the Kyiv embassy. If you've ever worked with special forces, they're not bodyguards. They're not embassy guards. They're not going to sit still. They are trained to do offensive military maneuvers. They're on the ground, Mr. President. We know they're on the ground, whether they're wearing civilian garb like I am now, camouflages like President Zelensky does, U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, U.S. Marines, U.S. Air Force equipped or issued uniforms. We don't know. But, Mr. President, damn it, would you acknowledge to the American public that you have troops on the ground? We know you do, because we know the Russians are jamming the computers that they're using.